What's the scariest culture or society that ever existed? Story one. Not sure if this counts, but I always thought being a Tlaxcalan would be pretty terrifying. They were the largest of the nations the Aztec Empire left independent, so they could have their flower wars. These were wars where the Aztecs would ritually declare war on a nation once a year and conquer them to take captives for slaves and sacrifices, as well as train their young warriors. The Tlaxcalans were entirely surrounded by the Aztecs and woefully outmatched by Aztec numbers and warrior society. Every year, like clockwork, the Aztecs would declare war on them, march into their lands, determined not to even give you a glorious death in battle, but rather take you and everyone else they came across alive as to be sacrificed. And then they wouldn't stop until they conquered and destroyed your capital. Imagine every year they come. You can fight, you can run, you can hide, but ultimately it won't matter because every year, somebody or likely multiple people who were unlucky and will now have their hearts cut out on top of the great temple. Even if you survive and start to rebuild, all you are doing is living on borrowed time, as you know they will come back the next year and the year after that. You can't keep it up. Eventually you'll be too weak or too slow or just plain old unlucky. And you and everyone you know and love will inevitably be captured one year, and your death will be violent, as your last sight is your still beating heart being pulled out of your chest as thousands cheer. Story 2. The Etoro of Papua New Guinea. They are well known among anthropologists because of ritual acts practiced between the young boys and men of the tribe. The Etoro believe that young males must ingest the white liquid of their elders to achieve adult male status and to properly mature and grow strong. In fact, just Papua New Guinea in general. Between cannibalism, headhunting, kuru, and endemic gang warfare, a bit of man or boy love is just par for the course. This tribe is often brought up in discussion about moral relativism and how far one can stretch the difference between right and wrong between different cultures. Is it wrong that they make their boys take facials from their elders? Most societies would say so, but in their frame of reference, it's perfectly okay, and who are we to judge? Some say. It comes down to whether or not objective evil exists outside of culturally constructed definitions. This example is used because it's so wrong to most of us. Even the relativist hardliners struggled to defend it as a cultural practice. Story 3. The Aztecs and Mayans were pretty gruesome. Little known fact, tribes like the Tlaxcalans and Totonacs were crucial allies in Cortez's conquest of the Aztecs. They were not well liked by their neighbors. Of course, the Spaniards sold those other tribes out as soon as they finished with the Aztecs. The Aztecs had basically become the hegemonic power of the region and had ceremonial wars where they would take people for human sacrifices. Most of the sacrificial rituals took more than two people to perform. In the usual procedure of the ritual, the victim would be taken to the top of the temple. The victim would then be laid on a stone slab, a chakmul, by four priests, and their abdomen would be sliced open by a fifth priest with a ceremonial knife made of flint. The most common form of human sacrifice was heart extraction. Story 4. The warrior culture of the Spartans was pretty intense. You would be separated from your parents at 7 and be trained to fight in the agoge. The hierarchy of their society was based on your strength in combat. I'm no historian, but it's hard to imagine another society being on their level at efficiently producing such cold assassins. The hierarchy of their society was based on your strength in combat. No, sir, it was not. It was based on your status as a citizen, homoioi, or non-citizen, perioikoi. And among the citizens, it was based on your bloodline. I won't go into the helot slave class because others already have. But to say your status was based on fighting prowess entirely isn't quite on the mark. In fact, the firstborn sons of the two kings of Sparta were expressly exempt from having to attend the agoge, but many of them went through it anyways. Story 5. A lot of historical examples here are terrifying. But honestly, a modern scary society is one that's trapped in a digital echo chamber, a culture where algorithms only show you what you already believe, where alternative viewpoints are seen as evil, and people lose the ability to talk to each other. It's a psychological prison without visible walls. I'm old enough to remember when settling a disagreement sometimes required a trip to the library to find a reference book. If you were lucky, you had a set of encyclopedias at home. A digital encyclopedia on CD-ROM seemed almost like magic. Wikipedia was basically Star Trek level data access. Instead of finding myself in an amazing future, people I grew up with refused to believe the dictionary is a useful reference for understanding what a word means. Like people I went to high school with, people with college degrees, completely convinced that what their favorite podcaster says is real, and anything printed in old books is brand new modern lies, manufactured for the purpose of tricking them. I'm right back to being a kid, in trouble for liking Jurassic Park, because dinosaur bones were put in the ground by the devil to test our faith. Getting screamed at for thinking evolution makes sense, or repeating that day's science lesson about how the moon came to be. It's like there's a valley between no education and lots of education where folks get themselves into trouble very easily. Know just enough to think they understand everything, but not enough to find the logic holes. End up joining book clubs that only read one book and sometimes just make up fan fiction instead of reading that one book. Story 6, The Steppe Nomads. It's kind of funny. Usually when depicting historical people's shows, we'll ramp up the exoticness of a soldier. But it is the exact opposite with the show. Huns look like your stereotypical Mongol. Realty, ritual scarring, and an elongated head from infant head bindings. This kind of brushes over the brutality they inflicted upon half the world. After defeating cities, they commonly exterminated the entire population. Each soldier was allocated a number, maybe 20, of civilians to end. They were bound and lined up, and the soldiers slit their throats. The Middle East was sent back to the Dark Ages. After venturing into Europe and defeating Hungary, they constructed a platform on top of live Hungarian nobles. They then had a feast on top of the platform, slowly crushing and suffocating them. And so many more examples. Story 7, I watched this documentary that had an episode about the Celts and talked about the rituals, etc. I found an article from archaeology describing an excavation from 1993. We do not know the precise date of Area A's grimmest deposit, the remains of 4 people thrown into a deep pit. Even if this burial group were later, their treatment is undoubtedly linked to ritual practices that began in 3rd century Gordian and would represent continuity of Celtic traditions after the town became part of the Roman province of Galatia. It is clear that several of the people whose remains we found in Area A died violently, with strangulation the most common cause of death, whether by hanging or garroting. All of these people were presumably sacrificed, but we cannot determine the exact circumstances. One possibility is that they were ended as part of Celtic divination rituals. Greco-Roman sources report that the Celtic religious leaders, or druids, were prophets who ended humans in order to discern the future, as revealed by the dying victims' movements. The Gordian victims could have been war captives, a category of people used in divination, but sometimes simply slaughtered. Story 8. It is threads like this that remind me that historians are few and far between on this platform. America? Really? And not a single Soviet Union? The Soviets are, of course, nowhere close to the scariest culture, but are at a bare minimum on par with Israel and the US. That said, the Khmer Rouge is the most terrifying modern society. It would not be uncommon to just be up and executed for no reason. You would be starved and forced to work as a quasi-slave. And this is only normal people, not even including glasses wearers, foreigners, francophones, the educated, and so on. Overall, I think the most terrifying society in ancient history is a pre-Columbian one. But I am not educated enough in the period to determine whether the Incas or Aztecs or Mayans or Wari or some tribe I've never heard of is the most terrifying. Or maybe it's just the modern French. That's possible too, I guess. Story 10, as headhunters, the Celts were well known for displaying the heads of their victims in front of their houses and on their chariots. To the astonishment of their adversaries, many Celts engaged in combat while fully nude. They are renowned for their iron longswords, which they used to cut off the heads of enemies slain in battle and attach them to the necks of their horses. Like people who lay low wild animals in some types of hunting, they tack up these first fruits upon their dwellings and give the blood-stained trophies to their servants while chanting a song of victory and reciting a paean. They preserve the heads of their most illustrious opponents in cedar oil, present them to strangers with pride, and explain that one of their ancestors, his father, or the man himself, turned down a substantial payment for this head. Some of them allegedly bragged that they turned down the weight of the head in gold. Story 11, arriving several centuries before Europeans, the Maori were the first people to settle in New Zealand. They have a culture that began in the early modern period. They had a history of using cannibalism in combat. In retaliation for the abuse of a chief's son, a sizable contingent of Maori warriors attacked a European prisoner ship in October 1809. The majority of the 66 persons on board were slain by the Maori, who also transported both dead and alive victims back to shore for consumption. A few fortunate survivors, who managed to hide under the boat's mast, watched in horror as the Maori ate their fellow passengers through the night and into the next morning. Story 12. The Mongols were viewed as savages and barbarians. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan, one of the greatest military leaders in history, they ruled across Europe and Asia and were best known for their horseback riding. They were extremely well behaved and skilled at utilizing a bow and arrow while mounted. They were proficient with lances and scimitars and used a composite bow that could tear through armor. They established the second largest empire in history, surpassed only by the British Empire, and were experts in psychological warfare and intimidation, though nothing about tea and crumpets is frightening. It all began when Temujin, who would later become Genghis Khan, made a youthful promise to raise the world to his level. He nearly did. The rest is history. He then turned his attention to China. The Mongol Empire was the most contiguous empire in human history, spanning from Vietnam to Hungary. Story 13. The Apaches resembled American ninjas. Without you even realizing it, they would approach from behind and cut your throat. Their rudimentary weaponry was primarily constructed of bone and wood. In addition to being the best knife fighters the world had ever seen, they were also proficient with hurling axes and tomahawks. Even the military struggled to defeat them as they terrorized the southwestern United States. Their ancestors educated contemporary special forces how to engage in hand-to-hand combat, and they were excellent hit-and-run fighters. Their victims were typically scalped. Story 14. They, albeit not all of them, as we have read on Listverse, frightened Europe with their pillaging and raiding. They employed weaponry appropriate to their size and fought fiercely. They were large, vicious, and skilled with axes, swords, and spears when capturing cities. Their entire religion revolved around war, and they held that if you died in combat, you had just fought another never-ending fight. On the battlefield, they destroyed everything in their path, demonstrating that they were all you could ever desire in a soldier. Story 15. Public execution is the penalty for anyone found stealing food in the famine-stricken country or trying to cross the borders. Despite the collapsing economy, Kim is still obsessed with the military and maintains his extravagant lifestyle. He and his father are worshipped as gods and regarded as the universe's saviors in North Korea. There are 250,000 dissidents imprisoned in re-education camps. He has fought a war against South Korea in which he has destroyed South Korean aircraft and ended South Korean leaders. Since he convinced the Soviet Union to give him a nuclear reactor in 1984, he poses a serious threat to the globe in terms of nuclear war. Story 16. You simply cannot avoid some scariness, even though Rome was arguably the greatest empire. In gladiatorial contests, criminals, slaves, and others were compelled to battle to the death. Among the most malevolent Roman figures were Nero, Caligula, and others. The Emperor Nero persecuted Christians as a group for the first time in 64 AD, and this persecution was dreadful. Dogs tore some apart, while human torches burned others alive. They were initially governed by heavenly monarchs, then transitioned to a republic, perhaps their best era, and lastly, to an empire. Legends abound about how a group of farmers who first fought wolves to preserve their sheep went on to become the greatest empire in history. The Roman Empire, or rather, ancient Rome, has one of the longest histories, along with a first-rate military and administrative structure. Ancient Rome endured an incredible 2,214 years, from its inception to the collapse of the Byzantine Empire. Story 17. Human sacrifice reached a golden age under the Aztecs, who started their complex theocracy in the 1300s. In order to please the gods, particularly the sun god, who required daily nourishment in the form of blood. Over 20,000 individuals were slaughtered each year. Victims' hearts were severed, and some bodies were ceremoniously consumed. Other victims suffered burns, beheadings, drownings, or drops from great heights. Shouting youngsters were slaughtered at various locations as part of a ritual to the rain god in order to make rain with their tears. A virgin danced for 24 hours before being slain and skinned as part of a ritual to the maize goddess. A priest then wore her skin to continue dancing. According to one story, 80,000 prisoners were ended at King Awitzotl's coronation in order to appease the gods. The victim is sometimes said to be cannibalized. Story 18. Communism is responsible for millions of deaths, more even than Germany and just the Soviet Union alone. Communists such as Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Nicolae Ceausescu, and others have ended millions of people. But the Soviet Union stands out as the worst. Stalin alone ended 10 to 60 million people. The Soviet Union was probably one of the USA's greatest foes. Living under Stalin put even the most average person into a state of constant fear. This alone makes the Soviet Union worse than Germany, in which the majority of Germans felt a certain level of safety as long as they supported the concept. Story 19. Japanese culture, folklore, and yurei. Supernatural beliefs are deeply ingrained in Japanese culture, and yurei, or spirits of the dead, play a major role in Japanese mythology. Yurei are frequently portrayed as restless spirits looking for retribution or closure. The horror of these spirits is emphasized by the well-known tale of betrayal and retribution, the Yotsuya Kaiden. In addition to paying respect to the deceased, Japan's yearly Obon festival acts as a reminder of the thin line separating the living from the dead. Japanese horror films like Ringu and Ju-on further highlight the culture's preoccupation with the paranormal by fusing beauty and terror. Story 20. Culture of Mexico, Dia de los Muertos. Despite its joyous appearance, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, has its roots in a profound respect for the deceased and the conviction that spirits make their way back to the world of the living during this time. Families erect ornate altars, ofrendas, that are embellished with food, pictures, and personal belongings of departed family members. This festival brings to light a nuanced relationship with death that blends respect with a certain ghoulish allure. Cultures can embrace death rather than fear it, as demonstrated by the recognizable sugar skulls and vibrant decorations that can arouse feelings of both joy and eeriness. Story 21. Haitian Voodoo culture. With its origins in West African customs, Voodoo is a religion that is frequently connected to the paranormal and dark magic. Voodoo ceremonies are carried out in Haiti to commemorate LWA spirits, which are said to have an impact on human affairs. Despite being highly sensationalized, the process of creating zombies is based on the idea that a person can be magically resurrected and controlled. This feature of voodoo has gained popularity thanks to horror movies, which has added to its unsettling image. The mystique and dread of the culture are heightened by spooky tales about voodoo practitioners and their relationship to the spirit world. Story 22. Folklore from Scandinavia, the Draugr. The Draugr is one of the most scary creatures in the many terrible folktales from Scandinavia. These undead, who are frequently characterized as previous warriors, are renowned to defend their graves and exact retribution on living people. In Norse sagas, stories about the Draugr are frequently connected to themes of avarice and the afterlife. The terrifying myths surrounding the Draugr, especially in Iceland and Norway, weave a complex web of terror that captures the harsh realities of northern existence, where survival and death were constant worries. Story 23. The Pretas and Bhutas in Indian culture. Ghostly beings called Pretas and Bhutas are very much a part of Indian tradition. While Pretas are regarded to be souls in a state of suffering, Bhutas are thought to be the spirits of the deceased who have not achieved peace. The legends of these spirits frequently warn against treating the deceased with contempt and stress the significance of carrying out appropriate burial ceremonies. The traditional belief in restless spirits is reinforced by stories of haunted places, including the notorious Bhangar Fort, which frequently draw thrill seekers and paranormal aficionados. Story 24. Filipino traditions, Manananggal and Aswang. The Aswang and Manananggal are two of the most frightful animals found in Philippine folklore. Often portrayed as a vampire-like creature that preys on the living, the aswang is a shape-shifting monster that can be both beautiful and terrifying. One particular kind of aswang, the manananggal, is renowned for its capacity to cut off its upper body and fly at night in search of prey. In addition to being warning stories, these legends also provide an explanation for the unexplainable, which engenders curiosity and terror in the local populace. Story 25: Romanian culture, the Carpathians, and Dracula. Romania is well known for being connected to the Dracula mythology, which was made popular by Bram Stoker's book and has its roots in the real Vlad the Impaler. The enigmatic and mist-covered Carpathian Mountains are sometimes portrayed as haunted places with ghostly inhabitants. Romanian folklore is strongly entwined with the cultural story of vampires, which makes it a central theme for horror fans. Tourists and thrill seekers alike are drawn to the spooky atmosphere created by the stories of the undead and their association with the beautiful but unsettling scenery. Story 26: Skinwalkers are part of Navajo culture. One of the most dreaded features of the Navajo culture in the American Southwest is the skinwalker mythology. Witches with the ability to change into animals are known as skinwalkers, and they frequently use their abilities for evil. Many Navajo people are so terrified of skinwalkers that they refrain from talking about them in public because they think it will draw their notice. This culture's intense respect for the natural world and the paranormal produces a chilling story that highlights the negative effects of abusing power. Story 27: Korean culture, urban legends, and Guishin. There are many ghost stories in Korean mythology, but the most well-known are about the Guishin, or ghosts of the deceased. These ghosts frequently take the form of vindictive characters, seeking justice for unresolved conflicts, reflecting the anxieties and societal ideals of the living. Urban legends like the tale of the Korean woman in white or the Red Room have become more well-known in modern society and are frequently discussed in relation to contemporary fears. These tales illustrate how conventional beliefs and contemporary anxieties coexist, fostering a continuous conversation about dying and the afterlife. Story 28: Haitian traditions, the Loa legend. Haitian Vodu, a religion that involves the worship of the Loa, spirits who act as a bridge between people and the divine, is frequently misinterpreted in popular culture. Voodoo includes a broad range of beliefs and activities, many of which place an emphasis on healing and community, despite the fact that it is usually depicted as sinister and gloomy. However, the eerie atmosphere around Voodoo is exacerbated by stories of evil spirits and mishandled rituals. The Loa's dual nature as guardians and possible prophets of disaster highlights the nuanced interaction between the supernatural and Haitian civilization. Story 29: Consider a whole month during which it is thought that the ghosts of the deceased are allowed to roam the planet. This is what China's Ghost Festival, which takes place in the 7th month of the lunar calendar, is all about. Families customarily bring food, incense, and paper money to placate ancestors and roving ghosts, a practice rooted in Taoist and Buddhist beliefs. Homes are frequently protected with talismans to keep off evil spirits, thus striking a careful balance between protection and veneration. Furthermore, the Ghost Festival is a potent reminder that the dead are never really gone in a culture that has a strong regard for ancestors. By paying respect to them, people maintain peace in both the worlds of the living and the dead by ensuring harmony between them. Story 30: The age-old custom of sky burials in Tibet's mountainous areas transforms death into a rebirth to nature. The bodies are offered to vultures and scavengers instead of being entombed or burned, which is the most direct way to restore the deceased to the earth. This rite, which has its roots in Buddhist philosophy, highlights the idea that the body is only a transient vessel. Offering it to the elements completes and honors the life cycle. The mystery of death is removed by the bare simplicity of sky burials, which can serve as a sobering reminder of our close ties to nature.